It started like any other Wednesday. I came home from work, tired but relieved to be back in the warmth of my own house. The comforting smell of pine from our Christmas tree lingered in the air. Kayla, my wife of 11 years, was in the kitchen, her laughter echoing faintly from her call with a friend. At least, that's what I assumed. "Hey, honey," I greeted her, setting my bag down by the door. She turned, her smile fleeting before she muttered a distracted, "Hi," and continued talking on her phone. Her tone was light, her giggle infectious. It was hard not to notice how she seemed. Alive, invigorated even. A stark contrast to how drained she'd seemed around me lately. I made my way upstairs to change, the weight of the day pressing down on me. As I hung up my tie, my thoughts wandered back to our recent anniversary dinner. She'd been distant, her attention divided, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. I chalked it up to work stress. That night, I decided to surprise her with a late coffee run to her favorite cafe. But when I reached the driveway, I saw her car wasn't there. Checking my phone, I didn't see any missed calls or messages. I shrugged it off. Maybe she'd gone to the store. An hour passed, then two. When she finally returned, her excuse felt thin. "I went for a drive," she'd said, avoiding my eyes. It wasn't the first time she'd been evasive lately, but I wanted to trust her. The nagging doubts crept in slowly, like shadows in the corners of my mind. It wasn't until a few weeks later, when I noticed the unfamiliar scent of cologne on her scarf, that my suspicion began to solidify. "Who's been wearing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced at it briefly. "Oh, probably one of the guys at work," she replied nonchalantly. "It's nothing, really." But something in her tone, a flicker of irritation, made my stomach twist. I nodded, saying nothing more, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. By the time I discovered the truth, I was no longer the same man. And neither was she. I couldn't let go of that uneasy feeling, no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise. Kayla had always been my rock. Fierce, funny, and loyal. But now, something felt off. I told myself I was imagining things, that stress and routine had clouded my judgment. After all, we'd built a life together. A cozy house, shared traditions, and a love I thought was unshakable. Still, doubt gnawed at me. Her late nights at the office were becoming more frequent, her phone glued to her hand like an extension of herself. I'd catch her smiling at her screen, her fingers typing rapidly. When I asked what was so funny, she'd brush it off with, "Just a work thing." One Friday night, I decided to surprise her by bringing dinner to her office. She'd mentioned a big deadline and said she'd be working late. With her favorite Thai takeout in hand, I arrived at her building, my heart light with anticipation. I imagined her surprise, the way her face would light up when she saw me. But when I reached the glass doors of her floor, it was dark, completely empty. No buzzing of computers, no voices of colleagues working overtime. I stood there, takeaway bags dangling in my hands, staring into the dimly lit office like an idiot. The security guard on duty must have noticed my confusion. "Looking for someone?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. "Yeah, my wife," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. "Kayla Green. She said she'd be working late." The guard scratched his head, his brow furrowed. "I haven't seen her tonight. Most of the staff cleared out by 6. Are you sure?" I pressed. "She works in marketing." He shook his head. "Sorry, man. Haven't seen anyone on that floor since this afternoon." I mumbled a thanks and headed back to my car, my mind racing. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe she'd gone to grab coffee. Maybe she forgot to mention a last-minute location change. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. When I got home, Kayla was already there, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in hand. She looked up as I walked in, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You're home early," she said, setting her glass down. "Yeah," I replied, struggling to keep my tone light. "Figured I'd bring you dinner at the office, but you weren't there." Her smile faltered, and for a split second, I saw panic flash across her face. But she recovered quickly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Oh, we wrapped up early and decided to finish the rest from home," she said casually. "I should have texted you." I nodded slowly, forcing a smile. Makes sense. But it didn't. And I could feel her words settling in my chest like a lead weight. Something was wrong, and she was lying to me. I just didn't know why. Not yet. That night, as Kayla slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I trusted, was slipping through my fingers. I didn't know what to do, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to find out the truth. The following weeks were a blur of mounting suspicion and feigned normalcy. Kayla continued her routine of late nights and vague explanations, and I played the part of the trusting husband. But every smile she gave me, every casual excuse, felt like a slap in the face. I couldn't let it go. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I stared at it, my heart hammering. I'd never been the type to invade her privacy. We'd always prided ourselves on honesty and respect. But now, that trust felt like a fragile thread, unraveling with each passing day. I hesitated, then reached for the phone. The screen lit up, revealing a message from someone named James. James, missed you today. Can't stop thinking about you. I stared at the words, my stomach twisting. My hands shook as I scrolled through their thread, each message cutting deeper than the last. Their conversations were flirtatious, intimate. They referenced meetups, secret lunches, and inside jokes I didn't understand. But it was the photos that gutted me. Pictures of Kayla smiling in ways I hadn't seen in years. There was one of her and James at a park, his arm around her waist, their faces close. Another of her leaning against his car, her hair tousled and lips slightly parted. The look on her face one I used to think was reserved for me. My head spun as I pieced it together. This wasn't just a fling. It was a full-blown affair. She wasn't working late or buried in deadlines. She was with him. The shower turned off, snapping me out of my daze. I quickly set the phone back and sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. My emotions were a storm of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak, and I needed to process it before I said or did something I'd regret. The next day, I called in sick and drove to Kayla's office. If there was any doubt left, I needed it gone. From a nearby coffee shop, I waited, sipping bitter coffee and watching her building like a man on a stakeout. At around noon, I saw her walk out. She wasn't alone. James, a tall, well-dressed man with an easy smile, was by her side. They walked to his car, laughing, completely at ease. My hands clenched around the coffee cup as I watched them drive away. I followed them, keeping my distance. They pulled into the parking lot of a hotel, and my stomach dropped. I sat there, frozen, as they disappeared inside. The sight of Kayla walking hand in hand with him, their bodies close, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I didn't need more proof, but I waited anyway, watching the minutes tick by like an eternity. When they finally emerged, their disheveled appearance spoke volumes. My worst fears were confirmed. Driving home, my mind was a whirlwind. Questions swirled endlessly. How long had this been going on? Was it something I did? Was I not enough? The answers didn't matter. The woman I'd built my life with was lying to me, betraying me in ways I never thought possible. By the time Kayla came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of whiskey in hand. She greeted me with her usual smile, oblivious to the fact that everything had changed. "How was your day?" she asked, hanging her coat by the door. I looked at her, searching for any trace of the woman I thought I knew. My voice was calm, but inside, I was barely holding it together. "Fine," I replied. "How was yours?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. "Busy. You know, same old stuff." I nodded, taking another sip of my drink. Right. Same old stuff. But I knew better. And soon, she would too. The days that followed were excruciating. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I looked at Kayla, my mind replayed the images of her with James. Her laugh, the way she looked at him, the way she used to look at me. My heart ached, and yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed a plan. I started paying closer attention to her habits. She was careful, almost meticulous, in hiding her tracks, but cracks began to show. Her work hours didn't match her stories. She'd excuse herself for phone calls that lasted too long, her voice hushed, and the perfume she wore to meetings was too much for something professional. On Thursday, she told me she'd be attending a late-night work dinner. "Don't wait up," she said with a smile that now felt rehearsed. I nodded, pretending to believe her. "Have fun." The moment she left, I grabbed my coat and keys, trailing her car at a safe distance. She didn't head toward the office or a restaurant. Instead, she took a winding road out of town and parked at a small, secluded cafe. I stayed in my car, watching as James arrived moments later. They greeted each other with an embrace that lingered far too long. My chest tightened, anger rising like a tide. I wanted to storm in, demand answers, make a scene, but I stayed put, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They sat at a corner booth, their heads close, sharing secrets I wasn't privy to. My phone buzzed with a notification, a text from her. "Kayla, dinner's going later than I thought. Love you. Don't wait up. Love you." The words felt like a mockery. How could she type those words while sitting across from him, her hand brushing his? My thoughts spiraled as I sat there, torn between confronting her and walking away. But then, as if fate had intervened, they stood and headed toward the parking lot. I watched as they kissed briefly, just enough to shatter the remnants of my composure, before getting into their respective cars and driving off. I followed her home, my mind racing with the words I wanted to say. When she walked through the front door, I was already waiting in the living room. "Hey," she said, startled to see me up. "I told you not to wait up." "I couldn't sleep," I replied, my voice steady but cold. "How was dinner?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the side before meeting mine. "It was fine. Long, but productive." "Productive," I repeated, standing slowly. "That's one word for it." She frowned, confusion flickering across her face. "What's that supposed to mean?" I stepped closer, the weight of my words hanging in the air. "I know, Kayla. I know about James. The dinners, the hotel, the lies." Her face went pale, her breath catching. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice defensive. "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't insult me by pretending. I followed you tonight. I saw you with him. I know what's been going on." Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Her mouth opened as if to deny it, but no words came. She looked away, guilt and panic etched across her face. "How long?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "How long has this been going on?" She finally met my gaze, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. "It's not what you think," she began, but I cut her off. "Don't lie to me, Kayla." I roared, my anger finally spilling over. "I saw you with him. I saw everything. So don't stand there and tell me it's not what I think." Her shoulders sagged, and the fight drained out of her. "A few months," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "Don't give me that. You don't just accidentally fall into someone else's arms. You made a choice." Tears streamed down her face now, but I felt no pity. Not anymore. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "Didn't want to hurt me? Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just hurt me, Kayla. You destroyed everything we had. Everything we built." She reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said coldly. "Don't touch me. Not after him." For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small. I looked at her, the woman I had loved for over a decade, and felt a hollow emptiness. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I do know one thing. You don't live here anymore." Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to protest, but I silenced her with a glare. "I want you out, Kayla. Pack your things and go. Be with him if that's what you want, but you're not staying here. Not after this." And just like that, the foundation of our life together crumbled into dust. Kayla stared at me, stunned. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, it looked like she might argue. But no words came. Instead, she stood there, tears streaking her cheeks, the weight of her actions crashing down on her like a tidal wave. "Please, Russell," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Let's talk about this. I made a mistake, but we can fix this." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Fix this? How do you fix betrayal, Kayla? How do you fix lying to my face for months while sneaking around with him?" She stepped closer, desperation in her eyes. I was confused. Things haven't been the same between us for a while. I felt, I don't know, lost. Lost? I snapped, my voice rising. "So instead of talking to me, you ran to someone else? You didn't even try to fix us. You just gave up." She flinched as if my words had physically struck her. "I didn't mean to give up," she murmured, her voice trembling. "It just happened." I slammed my hand against the wall, the sharp sound making her jump. "Stop saying that. Nothing just happens, Kayla. You made a choice. You chose him." For a moment, silence hung between us, heavy and suffocating. Her gaze dropped to the floor, her shoulders slumping. "What do you want me to do?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible. "I already told you," I said coldly. "Pack your things and leave." Her head shot up, panic flashing across her face. "Russell, no. Please. This is our home. We can work through this. I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes." I stared at her, feeling the hollowness inside me grow. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just about the affair. It's about the fact that you destroyed my trust. You took something sacred and threw it away like it meant nothing." Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. Not anymore. Instead, I turned and walked to the stairs. "You have until tomorrow," I said over my shoulder. "After that, I'll change the locks." I went upstairs, leaving her in the living room, her cries echoing faintly behind me. For the first time in 11 years, I locked our bedroom door and collapsed onto the bed. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind raced with memories of our life together. The laughter, the dreams we had shared, the promises we made. And now, all of it felt like a cruel joke. The next morning, I woke early. Kayla was already up, moving quietly around the house as she packed her belongings. I didn't acknowledge her. I couldn't. Every glance in her direction felt like a fresh wound. By mid-afternoon, she stood by the door, her bags at her feet. "I'll go stay with my sister for now," she said softly, her voice hoarse from crying. I nodded curtly, not trusting myself to speak. "Russell," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Goodbye, Kayla," I said, my tone devoid of emotion. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for any hint of forgiveness. But I gave her nothing. Finally, she picked up her bags and walked out the door. As it closed behind her, the house fell silent, the emptiness pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. For hours, I sat in the quiet, trying to process everything. I wanted to scream, to break something, to erase the pain coursing through me. Instead, I stared at the empty space where she used to sit, the ache in my chest growing with every passing second. But then, a thought pierced through the fog of my grief. If she thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she was wrong. I had given her everything, and she had betrayed me. It was time to take back control. It was time for her to feel the consequences of her choices. Kayla's departure left the house eerily quiet. I sat on the couch, staring at the door she had walked out of hours earlier. My emotions churned, anger, betrayal, heartbreak, all vying for dominance. But amidst the chaos of my thoughts, a cold resolve began to take shape. She didn't get to walk away from this with her life intact. She didn't get to destroy everything we built and move on as if nothing had happened. No, if she wanted to burn it all down, I'd make sure she felt the flames too. That evening, I pulled out our financial records, old legal documents, and any papers I could find that tied her to our shared life. I combed through everything, searching for leverage. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew there had to be something, a crack in her armor I could exploit. And then, I remembered the prenup. When Kayla and I got married, my parents had insisted we sign one. At the time, I thought it was unnecessary. I loved Kayla, and the idea of planning for a divorce felt absurd. But my parents had been adamant, and I eventually agreed to appease them. Now, as I read through the document, I realized just how much power it gave me. The prenup stipulated that in the event of infidelity, Kayla would forfeit any claim to our shared assets, including the house, cars, and savings. Everything I had worked for would remain mine. She had signed it without hesitation, back when we were young and in love, never imagining it would matter. But now, it mattered more than anything. The thought of her starting a new life with James, happy and carefree, while I was left to pick up the pieces of our shattered marriage, made my blood boil. No, that wasn't going to happen. She had made her choice, and now she would face the consequences. Over the next few days, I set my plan in motion. First, I reached out to a lawyer, explaining the situation and providing evidence of her affair. The texts, the photos, the receipts, they were all damning. My lawyer assured me that the prenup would hold up in court, especially with the proof I had. Next, I began separating our finances. I moved all my money into a new account, leaving only a minimal balance in our joint one. I canceled her access to the credit cards I paid for and changed the passwords to all our online accounts. If she wanted to move on, she could do it without my support. Finally, I turned my attention to the house. I contacted a locksmith and arranged for the locks to be changed the following week. I didn't want her coming back unannounced, pleading for a second chance, or trying to reclaim what she had forfeited. Through it all, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was something, a way to take control in the face of her betrayal. When the day came to meet with my lawyer and finalize the paperwork, I felt a strange mix of emotions. This was it, the beginning of the end. As I signed the documents, I couldn't help but think of all the moments that had led us here. The love, the laughter, the dreams we once shared. And now this. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, I felt lighter. Not happy, not even close, but unburdened. For the first time since discovering her affair, I felt like I was taking a step forward, even if the path ahead was unclear. When Kayla received the legal notice, her reaction was immediate. She called me, her voice shaking with anger and desperation. "Russell, what the hell is this? You're freezing me out of everything?" "You made your choice, Kayla," I said calmly. "You don't get to betray me and keep the life we built together. You gave that up when you chose him." She sputtered, trying to form a response. "You can't just cut me out like this. I gave 11 years of my life to you. And I gave you everything," I shot back. "But you decided that wasn't enough." The line went silent for a moment before she spoke again, her tone softer, almost pleading. "Russell, please. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. Don't throw it all away." I laughed bitterly. "You already did." And with that, I hung up, my resolve stronger than ever. This was just the beginning. She wanted freedom? Fine, but it would come at a price. The days that followed were a whirlwind of changes for both of us. For me, there was a strange sense of clarity in my actions, as if each step forward was cutting another thread that had bound me to Kayla. For her, I imagine, it must have felt like the ground beneath her feet was crumbling. The first sign that my plan was working came just a week after she received the legal notice. Kayla showed up unannounced at the house, our house, despite knowing the locks had been changed. I watched her from the window as she rang the doorbell over and over, her expression shifting from frustration to desperation. Finally, I opened the door, standing firm in the doorway. "Russell," she said breathlessly, "we need to talk." I crossed my arms, my face unreadable. "About what? The divorce? I think the lawyers are handling that." She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "No, about us. About fixing this. I know I hurt you, but You didn't just hurt me," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "You betrayed me. You threw away everything we had for a fling. And now you want to fix it? Kayla, the time for that was before you chose him." Her tears spilled over, and she stepped closer, reaching for me. "Please, Russell. I made a mistake. I was stupid, selfish, but I still love you." I stepped back, her words slicing into me. "You love me?" I laughed bitterly. "You have a funny way of showing it. Was it love when you lied to my face? When you snuck around with him? When you let him into our life?" She flinched at my words, her sobs growing louder. I don't love him, she insisted. It was never about that. It was just, I don't even know what it was. But it wasn't love. Then what was it, Kayla? I demanded. Convenience? Thrill? An escape from the boring husband who trusted you? She opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time, I saw the realization dawn in her eyes. She had no answer, no justification for what she had done. I think we're done here, I said, stepping back into the house. Good luck, Kayla. You're going to need it. I closed the door before she could respond, her cries muffled on the other side. It hurt to turn her away, but I knew I couldn't let her back in. Not after what she had done. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. As the weeks passed, the full extent of her choices began to catch up with her. She moved in with her sister, but from what I heard through mutual friends, the arrangement wasn't going well. Her sister had little sympathy for her, and their arguments became the talk of the family. Financially, things were worse. Without access to our joint accounts, Kayla was forced to rely on her own salary, which barely covered her expenses. Her high-end lifestyle, the fancy clothes, the spa days, the weekend trips, was unsustainable. And James? Well, he wasn't exactly the knight in shining armor she might have hoped for. I learned from one of her former co-workers that James was already distancing himself. Apparently, the fallout from their affair had put his job at risk, and he was desperate to avoid further scandal. The man who had promised her excitement and freedom was suddenly nowhere to be found. One evening, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, and when I did, her voice came through the line. Russell, she said softly, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need your help. I leaned back in my chair, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. Help? You mean after everything you've done, you're asking me for help? Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't have anyone else. I let her words hang in the air, the silence stretching between us. Part of me wanted to hang up, to let her deal with the mess she had created. But another part, a small, vengeful part, wanted to hear her out, to see just how far she had fallen. What do you want, Kayla? I asked, my tone cold. She hesitated, and I could almost hear her swallowing her pride. I need a place to stay, just for a little while, until I can get back on my feet. I laughed, the sound harsh and humorless. You've got to be kidding me. You think you can waltz back into my life after everything you've done? After the lies, the cheating, the betrayal? I don't expect you to forgive me, she said quickly. I don't know where else to go. Then maybe you should have thought of that before you tore our life apart, I said coldly. This isn't my problem anymore, Kayla. You made your bed. Now lie in it. Before she could respond, I ended the call, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and satisfaction. This was what she deserved. For the first time, I felt like the power was back in my hands. After the call, I sat in silence, my emotions a storm I couldn't escape. I wanted to feel triumphant, to bask in the justice of her suffering. But instead, I felt hollow. Despite everything, Kayla had been a massive part of my life. Cutting her out completely wasn't as satisfying as I'd hoped. The weeks dragged on, and I threw myself into work and hobbies to keep my mind off her. Friends reached out, offering sympathy, but I didn't want to talk about it. I wasn't ready to hear platitudes or advice. This was my mess to deal with. Meanwhile, news of Kayla's downfall trickled in. She had been forced to move out of her sister's house after yet another argument. From what I heard, she was staying at a rundown motel on the edge of town. Her job, once a source of pride, had become a burden. Colleagues whispered about the affair, and her reputation had taken a hit. I should have been glad. This was the price of betrayal, after all. But instead, I felt a strange sense of pity. She was paying for her choices, yes, but the woman I had loved, the one who used to dance in the kitchen and laugh at my terrible jokes, was gone. In her place was a stranger drowning in regret. One Saturday afternoon, I heard a knock at the door. Opening it, I was surprised to see Kayla's sister, Amanda, standing there. Her expression was tight, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of warmth. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded and stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. She sat on the couch, her posture stiff. "I'm not here to make excuses for Kayla," she began. "What she did was horrible, and she knows it. But she's not doing well, Russell. She's lost everything, her job, her reputation, her stability. She's spiraling, and I'm worried about her." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "And what do you expect me to do about it? She made her choices, Amanda. She's dealing with the consequences." "I know," she said, her tone softening. "But you loved her once. Doesn't that count for something? Doesn't she deserve at least a little compassion?" Her words hit a nerve, but I didn't let it show. "Compassion?" I asked, my voice cold. Where was her compassion when she was sneaking around behind my back? Where was her compassion when she destroyed our marriage? Amanda sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'm not saying you should take her back. I'm just asking you to think about it. She's at her lowest, and whether you believe it or not, she's sorry. Truly sorry." I didn't respond, and after a few moments of silence, Amanda stood. "I'll leave you to think about it," she said, heading for the door. "But don't let your anger blind you, Russell. You're better than that." As the door closed behind her, her words lingered, stirring emotions I thought I'd buried. The next day, I received an email from Kayla. It was long and raw, filled with apologies and explanations. She admitted she had been selfish, that she had taken me for granted. But there was something else, something I hadn't expected. "I wasn't looking for an affair," she wrote. "But James made me feel seen, Russell. For years, I felt like we were drifting apart, like I was just part of your routine. I didn't know how to talk to you about it, and I let that loneliness lead me down the wrong path. That's on me." Her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. Had I been blind to her unhappiness? Had I contributed to the rift between us? It didn't excuse her actions, but it made me question my own role in our downfall. I spent days wrestling with her words, replaying our marriage in my mind. Had I really done enough to nurture our relationship? Or had I been so focused on providing and maintaining stability that I forgot to cherish her? I didn't want to forgive her, couldn't, not yet. But I couldn't ignore the possibility that I had failed her in some way too. That realization was like a punch to the gut. Finally, I decided I needed closure. I called her and asked to meet. We agreed to talk at a neutral location, a quiet park where we used to go during happier times. When she arrived, she looked different. The confidence she once carried was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that was almost hard to look at. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly, sitting across from me on a weathered bench. "I need answers," I said, my tone firm. "I need to understand why." And so, she told me. She spoke about feeling invisible, about craving excitement and validation. She admitted that she had made terrible choices and that she hated herself for hurting me. Her honesty was brutal, and it didn't erase the pain. But for the first time, I saw her humanity, the flawed, broken person behind the betrayal. After our conversation, I felt a strange sense of peace. It didn't mean I forgave her, but it allowed me to let go of some of the anger I had been carrying. It was a small step, but it felt significant. I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I reconnected with old friends, started new hobbies, and even began seeing a therapist. Slowly, I began to rediscover the person I was before the betrayal, the man who had dreams and passions beyond his marriage. Kayla, meanwhile, seemed to be trying to rebuild her own life. She found a new job and moved into a small apartment. We kept our distance, only communicating through lawyers as the divorce finalized. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a bittersweet sense of closure. Kayla and I met one last time to exchange a few belongings. She thanked me for hearing her out and wished me happiness. I returned the sentiment, though my heart felt heavy. As she walked away for the final time, I realized that while our story had ended, my life was far from over. Months turned into a year, and I found myself in a better place. The anger and bitterness had faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. I was no longer defined by the betrayal or the pain. Instead, I was focused on building a future that was entirely my own. Kayla became a memory, one I occasionally revisited but no longer dwelled on. And as I stood on the brink of a new chapter, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope.